All right, we're recording. It is November 15. It's Gateway API meeting, and we've got lots to get through. First off, though, I just want to check in. If we do have a meeting next week, that's November 22. That is a week from today, but also the week of American Thanksgiving. I'm actually not sure. I'll be traveling then. I'm not sure if I'm going to be around or not. I haven't decided yet. But I'm wondering if anyone else will or won't be around if this conflicts. I know a lot of people will be traveling now. Do we have a handle on who might or might not be here?
I may be here.
Why don't we use reactions? So if you're going to be here and want to do a meeting next week, do a thumbs up. And if you don't want to be, if you won't be around, don't want to do a meeting next week, thumbs down. And we can just see who's voted which way.
Man, all this, now I've got to figure out how to use Zoom properly. Boy, that is a good tip. Where are we at? Oh, there, I found them. Thank you. Okay, looks like a bit of a mixed bag. Couple no's and a couple yeses is what I'm seeing so far. All right, well, I am a bit tempted to punt on this and just leave it till the 29th. But I'm open to what others think here. I think there's enough people that won't be around that we probably don't have enough people for, you know, a full meeting. But I'm open to what others think.
I'd agree with you, Rob.
Okay. Good
Yeah,
enough. That simplifies that. Let me bump this discussion to the 29th if I can type properly and just say no. And I can take that action item to go ahead and cancel the meeting on the, I should probably update the website, but definitely I can update the calendar to delete it. Cool. Okay, the next thing I wanted to go through was just a beta release update. Our next release, as far as we can tell right now, is targeting beta. You may have noticed that I added a GitHub discussion, as we discussed last week, just to describe the current state of what we're hoping to accomplish for beta and approximate timeframe for that. But I was also excited to see some great releases already supporting V1 Alpha 2. So congrats to Jeff, who released Console API Gateway 010 Tech Preview, sorry. Yep. Yes. But yeah, exciting to see that one roll out. And then I tweeted about that, and Manuel from Traffic pointed out that they actually already support V1 Alpha 2 as well. So awesome that we already have a couple. I know Istio has had V1 Alpha 2 in tree for a while, but the release that includes it is rolling out this week. So that will be our third. Contour, Nick, I'm guessing it looks like you put January for that.
Yeah, we're hoping to have an RC out before that, but yeah, that's when the release is actually due.
Okay, great. And for GKE, we know it's a matter of weeks, hopefully a small number of weeks. But I would hope it would be before January, but I can't say for sure. And then Kong looks like January as well. Cool. Are there any others in flight that we should keep track of here? All right, cool. Well, that's exciting. That one of our criteria for graduating to beta was that the V1 Alpha 2 API was broadly implemented. And it seems like we will certainly hit that criteria. So exciting to see this increasingly broadly implemented. Yeah, The next part of the graduation criteria for beta was really just to stabilize and finalize our validating webhook, because that's becoming kind of a core part of our release. And so based on that, I went through and found various issues that were targeted for the webhook improvement. A few of these are notably good first issue, help wanted, great ones to work on. If anyone's new to the project and wants to help out, these are, I think, well defined and would be great to get some help with. This one is a little trickier because it requires some knowledge of Kubernetes organization and really just talking to people probably in test infra about how to set this up. I think Harry has some knowledge of how this works, but this will certainly require help from someone outside of just Gateway API, I believe. So if anyone wants to tackle figuring out any of these or just wants to kind of lead in the webhook area, that would be very welcome. This is an area that is open to contribution. I don't think any one person is currently leading this push.
Hey Rob, maybe slightly related question in terms of the Kubernetes org. Do you know if anyone in the org is publishing Helm charts?
That's a very good question.
Because my understanding for CRDs is it's best practice to have a separate Helm chart for CRDs, and it occurred to me the other day about that maybe we would want to publish a Helm chart with the Gateway API CRDs that people could require as dependencies for their stuff.
I think it's kind of a controversial topic that I'm not familiar enough to make a good decision, but my understanding is that CRDs in Helm are not upgraded ever. And so I would be a bit concerned about publishing a chart that's just CRDs, given that you can't actually update them. What I've seen in a lot of products is they have the CRDs applied through kubectl and then the rest installed through Helm. Now, maybe there are reasons or ways to do it in a Helm chart that we could do. I'd just be a bit concerned about that.
Okay, that's interesting. Thanks. Is anybody installing the API CRDs through Helm, or is everybody going the kubectl way?
We'll be doing it through our existing Helm chart.
I think Kong. Go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to be clear that you install console as it is via Helm chart, and we're just going to add the API gateway as an option to that. So, good, Harry.
Yeah, I think Kong does install CRDs via Helm. No, and
it's optional.
It's optional, but I think we do upgrade them, right? If there are new fields introduced. I'm not sure though.
I'd have to double check, but I think we have the option where if you say you want them to be managed by the chart, we do actually update them. But if somebody needs to dig into this, I can take it async. We can talk about it in Slack.
Yeah, let's do that. And I think if that can be done, and if
I have a feeling that at the end of the day, it's going to turn out better if we encourage people not to do this with Helm.
I agree.
Yeah, like I think that that for critical system services, Cert Manager is a good example of this. The complexity around having a webhook, installing CRDs requiring cluster admin, lots of other things like that, sort of should mean that we should sort of push people to be like, look, if you want to be doing something with the Gateway APIs, you need to be aware that this is like a little bit more than just banging an app into the cluster, and you need to think about it a little bit more than that. And the best way to do that is to sort of say, you need to do our own install process rather than just providing a Helm chart.
And for what it's worth, like we support it, but I think if we had a time machine, we would never have touched CRDs with Helm.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That matches up with what I have seen a number of people say.
I'll just throw out another bit of complexity here or other option. I know for GK, we've been considering and or planning providing Gateway API as kind of like, I guess you could call it a cluster add-on kind of thing. So maybe other managed Kubernetes platforms will do something similar. I don't know. But that may be another way that CRDs get installed in Kubernetes clusters. Not quite sure yet.
To an extent, I think this is also related to that issue that Harry opened a while ago. That's like summary of out of tree problems, because we're not like your regular CRD. You know, we're kind of I don't want to. The only words I can think of are a cut above, but that's not really the right way to say it. You know, like we're a little bit more trusted than your regular CRD because we get to and have the burden of using the Kubernetes API group, and so like there's sort of an imprimatur that says this is a bit more trusted because it's the upstream that's doing it.
Yeah, I think official is the word, right? Because we are an official Kubernetes CRD.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we are not, so I think it need, and since we have this special concept of multiple implementations and being out of tree, I think we will have to figure out a way to, we need external help on this, right? So
yeah, there's been some discussion obviously with API machinery and architecture around versioning and how we handle that and how we and to a certain extent because it's related installation, but yeah, I mean the answer so far that I've heard pretty consistently is, well, installation is a cluster admin problem. So for some people, a cluster admin is your managed provider. For other people, it's the person, you know, setting up the cluster. But for other people, it's kind of this other layer. And as we've already discovered with Gateway API, roles in Kubernetes clusters are different for every organization. And so it's hard to correctly layer this, but probably deserves another discussion somewhere. I'm not sure. But right now, it sounds like if I'm understanding the thread from everyone else, it seems like thank you for adding some notes on this. It seems like the current standard is to install CRDs directly from our repo with kubectl as a recommendation, as a prerequisite for using any of these implementations. But there is great interest in something better than that or improved than that. So,
I mean, would we recommend against like vendoring if somebody wants to do that and, you know, take on the burden of upgrading, like matching and whatever?
What do you mean by vendoring? Do you mean like including CRDs in your repo or your deployment or?
Yeah, something like that. Like, you know, you essentially copy it over. You're not going to modify it, but if you like, suppose want an air-gapped installation, something like that.
Oh yeah, I see. I mean, it's YAML. Is like when I heard vendoring, my immediate thought was that not just copy it over, but also make modifications, which is a bit of a scary thought. But if you're just copying it over verbatim for ease of installation, then that seems appropriate if versioning is identical.
Yeah, I think if you're modifying, I think all bets are off, and you probably should have a way to catch that, maybe, you know, including some hash or something, but that's for later, I guess.
Yeah.
So I just dropped a link to a little toy project that I experimented with, which can do vendoring. So it basically, if you needed to do that install, you can write code which will generate the YAML from your Gateway API. It's pretty straightforward. It's just a little bit skanky and horrible.
I kind of feel like it is neat, James, but I kind of feel like this should be one of the things that we should solve with the bundle, and the at the end of the day, what we should end up with is to install the gateway APIs, install this, I mean, maybe we have to do kubectl, the official instructions are kubectl GitHub URL, and that YAML ends up including all of the stuff that's in the bundle. So the CRDs themselves, plus the webhook and any other stuff that's required for as part of the bundle for the bundle to be supported. As part of that, one of the things I was thinking was like maybe we need to standardize on where the validation webhook runs and a bunch of other stuff like that, so that you can, with all the stuff that we've been talking about, with are we going to need people to do extra validation and require people to run the webhook or whatever? If we are going to require people to run stuff, then we should provide a standard way to install it and say you must use the standard way to install it or something like that, or you should at least use the standard way to install it.
I think we have to be sure we allow for the fact that we're going to be coming out with different bundles, and any vendor's product may only support, up to version X of the bundle. So we've got to make sure there's allowances for people to install the bundle that they support, not, which may be an older version, right? Or significantly older in some cases.
So so this is part of the version management story that Rob has been working on, right? Like that we need a way to be like, you must have at least this version of the bundle working or something like that, and have some level of compatibility between bundles or something like that. Because right now you can only have one version, like because it's CRDs, you can only have one version of the gateway API installed on a per cluster basis. End of story. And I don't think there's any way around that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I agree. I think you are kind of trapped with a single bundle version per cluster by definition. I also wanted to go back to an earlier comment you made, Nick, about a standard way to install a specific bundle, and that being our recommendation. I think that's a good starting point. I think the most important thing for us to define is what a valid installation looks like, the characteristics of a valid gateway API installation. And then it would make sense along with that to provide a means to reach that valid installation, right? But I think the most important point is just defining what that valid installation looks like. Okay. Lots of good discussion here. What is
Luan has some stuff in the chat about that she did git clone, make, generate, make, install. I think that's perfectly fine for now. But what we're saying is that we should have a way that makes it easier to be confident that you're doing the right thing, that we've told you what the right thing is.
Yeah, like right now our installation instructions completely ignore webhook as an example, which is something that we can't have once we get to beta. And sorry, Lewin, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I just wondering if it's the right way. I just go to the GitHub, did a git clone, do make, generate, make, install, and I can see that all the CRD are created on my cluster.
Yeah, so that definitely works. One problem with that approach is it is going to pull the latest. Basically, all our development goes to the master branch. So as soon as we merge something in, it lands on master. So what you're going to get with the git clone by default is just kind of the latest non-released code we have. We do have tags. So if you checked out a specific tag, or I think John mentioned a one-liner kubectl apply based on a GitHub tag, that could get the CRDs that were released at version 0.4.0, and that might be a little bit safer. But what you have certainly works, and it's probably recommended for development when you're kind of wanting to work with the latest set of APIs.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. Great. Well, this is good discussion. Yeah, so there's a lot we could follow up on here. does anyone want to, James, you've been writing a lot and you raised this discussion. Would you be comfortable creating kind of a follow-up issue to summarize this? And then we could go from there.
Yeah, I'm happy to create the issue.
Great, thanks. Okay. All right, so next, that's Webhook. And again, if anyone wants to volunteer to help out with Webhook, there are a variety of issues, including a couple good first issues. So if you have time or you know someone who's wanting to get involved in open source Kubernetes things, this is a great opportunity. All right, next one is conformance. One of the graduation criteria for beta is having meaningful conformance tests in place. I just kind of threw this out here. I've been working on some conformance related things, which we'll discuss later, but this is basically my approximation of about where we are or where I hope to be today for conformance. And then really the new features are also what we're trying to include in beta. And that's kind of the last major obstacle before we get into reviews and approvals. And rewrites and redirects. I'm really hoping to get this in today or soon. We've had some great feedback on this one. Traffic matching, that is a gap that Shane has been working on and should have some time to discuss it today. And then route inclusion and delegation, that's bumped to our next meeting. Jeff is taking that on. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I'll post to the Slack channel the proposal, so we don't have, by next week, so that people don't have to wait 2 weeks to even be able to start looking at it and stuff.
Yeah, that'd be great. Getting some initial discussion and review before we meet is always helpful. Cool. All right. So that's all that's on my mind for beta. Are there other things we should be thinking about as we're getting, as we're working towards a beta release? Are there things I've left out, features that we really want to see included? Other things that I may not have thought of that are important to address? Cool. Okay. Well, if you think of anything, definitely let me know. I have started, I think it already existed, a V1 beta 1 milestone. I've added a few more things into that milestone. As you see things that you think belong in V1 beta 1, don't hesitate to add them in. Yeah, we can go from there. Okay, so with all that said, let's get into some actual gaps. The first one is rewrites and redirects. This gap has been going on for a while now, but I think we really are close to consensus on this one, I hope. There have been a few changes since last week based on some good feedback. Trying to remember exactly what changed. I think this is a significant one. The absolute path modifier has not changed at all, but replace prefix match. This is one that has gone through a variety of different name changes, but the concept has been fairly consistent throughout. Yeah, this is now just called replace prefix match. Another change that's significant in this past week is based on popular feedback. The types that are used here for both rewrites and redirects are shared. So the path modifier types are basically just referenced by rewrite and redirect. So we're not redefining these in both places. I think that is a better solution here. Then the other thing I wanted to highlight is instead of request rewrite, it's been renamed to URL rewrite. This is based on a discussion I had with Harry, who raised a good point that request rewrite could, and in some implementations does, include things like header modification, query param modification, a variety of other things. Whereas my purpose for this filter was very, very much tied to host and path rewrite, which felt like it could fit more neatly into the URL rewrite name. So overall, I'd say these have been relatively minor tweaks. Oh yeah, one other thing. I have also provided a set of future extensions here. So basically, two of the other most common kinds of path rewrites I've seen are based on prefix, basically providing your own pattern. So right now, the proposed prefix path rewrite is based on the match. That's something that most implementations I've written above can support. But it is also relatively common to support bringing your own pattern. So you match on /foo_bar or whatever, but the pattern you actually want to replace is only /foo. So in that case, you would provide your own pattern and substitution. And similarly for regex, for regular expression, the same thing, you provide a pattern and a substitution. So these are, again, this is not actually part of the proposal. It is a section of how we could extend this in the future. I'm not suggesting starting with all these different types, but I think it's a pretty natural extension point. Yeah, so that's what I'm thinking in regards to rewrites and redirects. I've gotten a ton of feedback on this already, but I wanted to give one more option. It's very easy to lose track of what's changed in this GEP. So I wanted to give a summary of what's changed in the past week and give anyone an opportunity to provide feedback, suggest changes one last time. Otherwise, I may remove the hold and get this in relatively soon. Any hesitation on the current direction? Any of the changes I mentioned seem weird or wrong?
Looks pretty good to me. I like the URL rewrite name. That's much clearer, I think.
Cool.
LGTM.
Great. Okay, well, hey, I will take that. Thanks to everyone. I know this has taken a while to get through, and I appreciate all the good feedback throughout. I think we've got to a much better place than we started with on this one. So cool. All right, the next one, I'll hand it off to Shane because Shane has really been leading this GEP. It's 735, focused on L4 traffic matching. And Shane, maybe if you can just give some updates. We discussed this in, at high level last week, and I know a few things have changed a bit since then. So maybe you can just highlight anything that may have changed in the past week.
Yeah. So since last week, the two big changes are Howard John had requested the network match, basically looking a little bit more like a gateway address. So that's in the spec now, and that allows you to say address type. So you can say IP or a named address. There are two people were interested in that, so it seemed like good feedback. The other thing is, even though the original issue called for port matching, Rob and I talked a little bit, and I was kind of feeling weird about port matching given gateway listeners and kind of the constraints there on how useful it was actually going to be. It seemed like Rob kind of felt the same way. So I pulled them out for now and put them in the alternatives considered, something to consider for later. Mostly just to keep this nice and small, and it is quite small now. So those are the two big changes since last week.
Cool. Yeah, I think this is really great. I know John has had some feedback on this already, and I have too. And I think this is really close. I really like how you've kept this as concise as possible here, really focused on the goal of address matching. I think someone either in this PR or the issue before it had commented that really the attributes we have to match on are not that many, but destination and source address are very obvious starting points here. And to me, this feels valuable. It seems like something that could be broadly useful. And I think this is a reasonable way to represent it. I think the addition of a named address is interesting. I know there are a variety of different use cases out here, but I think that helps make it potentially more useful. You know, some providers may have names for addresses, as we already have in the gateway, the concept of a named address. Or I think there are some providers that do matching on like a service name and translate it to a cluster IP as a rough example. So I think there's a variety of potential use cases for named address. Yeah, that's I like this, but I should let other people talk about what they're thinking too.
Most of it is alternatives considered at this point.
Yeah.
which I think was just, you know, I've had lots of ideas about ways I'd like to go, like adding sitters and stuff as a type, address type, but I think small is good to get started. This is gonna be very contentious if there's too much in it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, this looks really great to me, Shane. I think I agree that adding CIDR routing and stuff in we'll probably do it at some point, but you've got the space in there to do it with the type. So yeah, I think that's great.
Roger that. Thank you. So if nobody else has any other like questions right now, I would just appreciate more feedback on the PR.
Sorry, I didn't take a look at the complete question. Is why source address? Just curious.
So
Very
it's
common.
possible. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say it's very common to say you want to allow traffic from maybe you have specific external clients that you're going to allow the connections from or calls from, and so you hard code in the address or in your config those addresses as valid sources. So.
Yeah, and that's why we brought up the idea of sitter too, which I think we have cases already for that in Kong, basically saying this subnet needs to be the matched source address. So
yeah, I'm actually surprised that we're not supporting that. It is a pretty common thing.
I can just add it. Like, it's trivial to add at this point. It's in the alternatives considered. But like I said, I was trying to keep things really small. So if you're feeling really strongly, I'd say just pop in on the PR and be like, actually, let's just add sitter, and then we can have a discussion about it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just out of curiosity. What if people want to use network policy on top of this? Would that cover the source address part? To say, I attach a network policy to this gateway, and this is L4 gateway, and my network policy, you can specify in the network policy to say who can come to access the gateway policy. Would that achieve the same result?
I could see how you could get to a similar result that way. Yeah.
I think there's a couple differences, but that is a good point. There's definitely similarities between the two. One, unfortunately, there's not a clearly defined relationship between network policy and ingress or gateway implementations. So in many cases, network policy is not honored or is just entirely ignored by ingress or gateway or load balancer implementations. But then second, I think this is ever so slightly different in that this is really about routing configuration. So you're saying route requests from this source IP to here, which is slightly different than block all requests from this source IP or CIDR. So even if network policy and this, like there is overlap, but I think it is sufficiently different and nuanced that this still has value.
Yeah, I mean, like she said, it's definitely like you could kind of do the same thing, but I think the biggest difference is well, I mean, I think if conceptually it's like network policies constraints that could conflict with these they kind of could conflict with anything. If you block IP addresses from accessing the cluster, it's not really specific to how you did your matching rules for a TCP route. It could affect any network traffic in the cluster, right? So it's very broad. This is, I don't know, it's an interesting thought though. I'd definitely invite you to jump on the PR and like start writing it out some more.
Yeah, I'll read this through. I'm only reading whatever, Rob is showing to me. That's jumping to my eye. Got it.
Yeah. Sorry, Jeff, did you want to say something?
I was just gonna say, I think, that, a lot of people will want to do, either IP reputation or geo IP based filtering. They do it at the gateway as opposed to some other layer. So that's where I think we want to maybe make an extension in this that relates to this. Not suggesting it right to start with.
Yeah, it definitely would make sense that we would want to do something like that at some point. I think that if you're going to do GIP, you're going to need definitely that to be an extension. I think that for Leon's question, that the way that I think about this is that network policy acts at the level of a CNI. It's like it stops traffic from getting in. It's deny only, right? Like you can't, and so the if you're using network policy on a namespace where a gateway is, then it's going to stop traffic getting to the gateway to some extent, and that depends on exactly how the gateway is implemented. But like that, in the most likely case, your network policy will stop traffic from getting to the gateway. Whereas the thing that this does is it means that when the traffic gets to the gateway, you can use the source address or the destination address as discriminators for routing. So you can say, traffic from this address goes to service A, but traffic from this address goes to service B, which means that your listener, which as of this in the spec as it is today without this gap, right now our listener is a hard one-to-one binding of all traffic arriving at a specific port on the address of the gateway goes to this service. End of story, nothing you can do about it. And so this gives you a bit more flexibility to say, based on the source address or the destination address, you can pick which service the traffic will end up at. I don't think there's much more space aside from source address, destination address, and the ports. That's it at the layer 4 level. That's all you can do. And so if we do at some point add ports in, then that's the maximum feature service that layer 4 traffic matching can have.
Roger that.
Yeah, that's a good summary. Great. Okay, so this is 9:32. Some good discussion already here. Encourage everyone to add some more comments on this one. We don't have that many PRs, so it's not too hard to find. But yeah, thanks again, Shane, for taking this one on, and hopefully we can get it in soon.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you all.
Great. All right, so the last thing I had on the agenda today, and I should mention, as always, feel free to add things to the agenda if you want. But the last thing I had added here is about conformance. And this doc is going to look very familiar because I've already shared the vast majority of it, but I really just wanted to cover this section at the bottom. And that's because I want to get to a point where I can actually start writing tests again and structuring this. And so there's kind of a proposed structure. There's MVP that I'm proposing now of where we can start with this. And I'm hoping that we can get enough information, enough consensus on this approach that I can take it back to a PR and actually start working. So with that said, I think the MVP is simpler than what I've defined above. First, I think we should only cover core features with these tests to start. Like I want just the minimum set of tests we can possibly start with, just so we can agree on structure, on where everything belongs, and then we can add tests as we go. But I want to get some conformance tests checked in as soon as possible. And what I think that looks like is running tests against a specified class in an existing cluster, not trying to spin up any new clusters, anything like that. It just runs with a class name against a cluster that already exists, only covers the core features of the API. So we don't, a lot of the discussion, a lot of the complexity comes around how we represent extended features and support for extended features, which are very real things to figure out. But I think right now we just desperately need to get some conformance tests in place. And if we're testing core conformance features, well, then we don't have to worry about that specific side of things. Then we want to output some kind of structured format that can be parsed and used to generate reports for showing conformance. The reports themselves are certainly a thing for later, but at this point, just having some kind of structured format in JSON that represents the results of test runs will be helpful. And, you know, where possible, we do want to share code and structure with ingress controller conformance. And I think that's really it. I wanted to use around the same test structure as defined before, except I don't think is enabled or URL are needed yet. I want to get both of these involved, but again, I'm just trying to find the smallest possible set that we can start with. So yeah, that's a lot, but hopefully also not that much. Does this seem like a reasonable direction to head for conformance? This kind of structure, this kind of initial approach?
I think so. I think I just have the question that I think, Rob, we discussed is, will we create like dynamic gateway resources? And
yeah.
If yes, then do all implementation support reconciling gateway resources?
Yeah, thank you. I'm scared about this one because I think this is going to make conformance more challenging. But from what I can understand right now, there's a chunk of implementations that don't support just, you know, responding to arbitrary gateway creation. Like I create gateway foo of your class and you can't respond to it. That's my understanding, right? There are some implementations that basically ship with a pre-existing gateway, or the gateway is part of the initial deployment, and then routes are attached to that. Does that sound correct?
Yes. So it's definitely going to be the case for Contour that the Contour will not automatically create more infrastructure to fulfill a created gateway as of now, and it won't for a while. And I feel like the MVP for this test suite should be that you pass it a gateway class and then it enumerates any gateways in there and runs the tests against each of them. And then we leave automatic gateway creation testing for later.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about that, and that is certainly the easiest starting point. But then it makes me wonder, what does that standard gateway look like, right? You know, what if one implementation ships with a gateway that listens on port 80 and another implementation listens on port 8080, you know, arbitrary example, right? Do we just run tests against every, or what if one gateway only supports one listener where others support two listeners? Is there, yeah.
This feels to me like there should be enough information in the status of the gateway to tell you like what you need to test. You know, like, you know, how do you get to the gateway status should have enough information to say, you know, what address do you go to? What path do you go to? How do you actually test the thing that you're talking about?
Yeah.
And so if that's not the case, then we've missed something in the spec and we need to add that. You know, because that's what you want to end up with from the gateway point of view from a user, that you can look at the status of the gateway and be like, okay, this is the gateway I've got to use. How do I get my requests to my app? And so, like, in the sense of if there's multiple listeners, it should just, I feel like it should just be like nested for loops, right? Like, you know, for each gateway, enumerate the listeners for each, enumerate the addresses, enumerate the listeners for each of those, then run another set of tests, like the test that those things are doing the thing that we test. It's just basically just for loops all the way down to be like for each gateway, for each address, for each listener, and the combination of all of it, the matrix of all of those things is what we test.
I agree with that. And for what it's worth, we're in a similar boat at Kong. Like we're going to be trying to have gateway support done V1 Alpha 2 by January, but that doesn't include provisioned or managed gateways. Like we're focused on unmanaged gateways because that's the current use case and that's the only thing end users need today. But we also, like our controller also does actively fill out the spec and the status, and it otherwise operate. Like if you update the gateway, it does update the actual gateway resource. So it would seem to fit with that model.
Okay, that was going to be my next follow-up. If conformance tests were to modify the gateway, is that something that is supportable if conformance tests added additional listeners, for example, additional ports?
No, that wouldn't be. Like read only, basically. It would actually turn it back to because it doesn't consider itself the source of truth in the unmanaged mode.
Got it.
At least today.
Agreed. That's the same for content.
I think we need, like, this is a sufficiently complex area, but one way we could simplify, if other implementers also agree, is we can start with something like we're trying to chunk it down. So we can start something like, okay, we do tests for, let's say, HTTP route, port 80 is plain text, port 443 is HTTPS. And that's like, we standardize on a gateway resource that we'll test, and we get like a few tests in there. And then as we start adding more tests, we sort of add them in like standardized ways, right? Which is something that implementations can expect, I think, as they, because when you're running the test, before that, you will have to set up, like, if you're not provisioning the gateway, provisioning resources, then, there will be a setup phase before the tests, right? And then implementations can account for these, like, okay, this is the gateway that is expected, and they can in the setup phase already configure it, right? So then we know, like, okay, this will be configured correctly. But if we can start with like 80 and 443 just initially, that would give a good feel whether this could work or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we shouldn't even need to hard code 80 and 443. Like that stuff is in the spec already. You should just take the listener, take the type, take the specified kinds, or the kind, we have the listener type. The listener type tells you what tests you should run on that port. So if you set, for some unknowable reason, set 443 to be HTTP, then the test should just pick that up and support it, because it doesn't put semantic meaning on the port numbers. It just says, you said this is a HTTP thing, I'm going to run the HTTP test against whatever port you've specified.
Yeah. Now, go ahead, Jeff.
I was going to say, I had assumed, to be honest, that the test itself would actually configure the gateway. So it's creating a properly formed configuration, sending that to the gateway controller, and then validating that through its test.
Yeah,
and I think that's the eventual desire.
That is the approach that works better for GK's implementation and some implementations, but it does not yet work for, it sounds like, at least Kong and Contour and probably others. Jeff, from what it sounds like you're saying, it sounds like your implementation does support basically provisioning arbitrary gateways.
Yes, yeah, it does.
Okay, great. Okay.
And to be honest, I think that the test itself should be creating the config. I mean, there's, we could get a way to work around it, but because that tells you you've got a properly constructed configuration. So it's not just that the test, the configuration performs the way you want it, but that it actually accepts the proper configuration. So
yeah.
Well, for what it's worth, I mean, there was a large doc on this previously by John, and that's actually, I think in there, I don't know if it's actually in there, I'm just going to call them managed and unmanaged gateways. I feel like that's easy enough. like there was a lot of evidence that unmanaged gateways, existing gateways that you would then put a gateway on top of was common. I know like even Istio has an option for it. So I think we should, if we're going to have the option, like if we're going to have the testing framework point at a gateway or create a gateway, I think it should just be optional whether or not it creates the gateway. If that's something that like would, if Jeff, for instance, you don't have the unmanaged type, so it doesn't make any sense for you to do all the provisioning. Just have the framework have the option to set up either.
So what I'm hearing is really two things here. One, for these kind of unmanaged gateways, that these kind of implementations, what we really would need to do if we wanted conformance tests to run against them is we would need to basically parse pre-existing gateways and run a set of conformance tests based on the characteristics of those gateways. Whereas what the other and larger chunk of conformance tests would cover would be things like, say, cross namespace references or other things that may be more complex, but would require control of both the gateway and routes. Like for conformance tests would be able to provision both gateways and routes, which I think everyone's agreeing that's kind of the ideal end state here. And the question seems to be the intermediate state of how we test implementations that are unable to kind of handle arbitrary gateways.
So I was thinking, sorry, I'll just real quick. I was just going to say, I was thinking that from an MVP point of view, I think it's harder to query the configuration of gateway and then make your test fit that versus actually just writing out the config to the gateway and testing the conformance at that point. So that was the other piece of my thinking on it.
I kind of feel like it feels to me like if you have a thing that takes a gateway, parses it, figures out what the features are, and then runs tests based on that, and then you want to be able to test that that a gateway that you create like meets a certain set of goals, that you need the first if you have the first one, then the second one is easy, because then you add like an outer loop that says create gateways that look like this, then run the other tests that look at the gateway, right? Like, yeah. And so like it feels like they're kind of you could do it as if your test parse the gateway and look at what's enabled, and ideally in my mind, this is why in my mind there should be stuff on the gateway class that tells you what the gateways are going to look like. And what features should be enabled. Then you can also chop the test by that. And so that I feel like the MVP should be look at the gateway and run some standard series of tests based on some of the values in the gateway. Like I think it's that should help. That should get us started. And like I think that the first test we add should be, can you serve a HTTP service out of this thing? That's it. No fancy stuff, nothing. Like that's the basic, can you expose foo.com/ and that's it.
Yeah, for context, the original, this goes back many months at this point, but my initial attempt at a gateway conformance test was not too dissimilar from Ingress, in that you basically define a YAML scenario. Basically here's a gateway and here's a route, and then you define characteristics. You expect this, and this to happen based on that. And those are very easy tests to write and fairly easy to understand. What you're describing is certainly much more flexible in the sense that I write something like more abstract that can, understand a gateway and then run a set of tests against that gateway or that listener based on how that gateway is configured. But it is a decidedly different approach to conformance testing.
It sort of flips flips the gateway resource ownership, right? So then like the implementation defines the gateway, and then implementation can opt in, oh, I want to run these tests because I don't support these X number of tests right now. Right? And when we could like do something as dumb as, I don't know, having an annotation for testing framework, or having names for namespaces or gateway resource, like we could even like do very simple stuff to, because it's only for implementers, right? It's not user facing. So it just, it's sort of dependency inversion sort of a thing here.
Yeah. And just so I can understand, is this something that will be, kind of a consistent characteristic of these implementations, or is it kind of a temporary thing?
Temporary for content.
Okay.
We will have an implementation, I think. I'm going to go ahead and say we won't. I won't say we will. We would most likely have an implementation of managed gateways long before we'd be able to get all of our end users to move to that implementation. Like, we'll have the unmanaged option around for a long time.
Yeah.
However, I think it's probably valid to say that if you can do the managed option, then the unmanaged ones are going to end up being conformant, right? Like if your ingress controller can do the managed tests, then when you do when you have an unmanaged gateway that makes it in past the validations key point, then the same tests and stuff should apply.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Like, we will eventually, I think, have this, although it's not on the roadmap right now. So,
got it. Okay, well, this is very helpful. I had this in the back of my mind around conformance, and it really kind of throws everything I have thought about for conformance. It will make me rethink things. I'll come back with some kind of proposal. Maybe I'll throw it in Slack or on GitHub. I'm not quite sure the best way to prioritize things, because as Jeff mentioned, the easiest MVP is just just test managed gateways with the existing kind of, here's some YAML, here's characteristics that we want to observe. But I also want to be, or go ahead.
Well, I'm not trying to be a stick in the mud, but just to suffice to say, that way works for some. The other way sounds like it works for everyone.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
I mean, we could also shortcut this a little bit by saying, when you want to run the conformance tests, the test includes the name of the gateway that you need to do the test or something like that. And then if you want to pre-create those gateways so that they match, then great. That might be a way to get to an MVP quicker. So you can say, well, simple HTTP gateway does simple HTTP requests with no fancy shenanigans. And then you run the simple HTTP test against the simple HTTP gateway. And so if you want to do the tests and want to have you can pre-create all of the unmanaged gateways with the right names. Maybe you have the same unmanaged gateway 20 times with different names or something like that.
Yeah, I think we're talking about this a lot, but at the end of the day, the actual implementation of the test is going to be very simple.
Yeah, I hope so. It's there's just so many different ways to do this, and want to take a reasonable approach here. So let me think about it some more. If anyone has more thoughts on how we can structure these, definitely let me know. But I'll try and have something out this week where not necessarily a test PR, but just more thoughts on how these could be structured. And we can go with that.
Appreciate you thinking about those things.
Cool.
Rob, just before we end, James, you posted something for the next meeting of kind of discussion issues from implementers. I was thinking it would be great, like we have a list for ourselves, a console team of the things that we found that are challenging or open to interpretation. So maybe if other implementers put lists like that together, we can all post them someplace. And I don't know if we want to open an issue or do it in Slack or create documents and then just share the links to them. But that way, by the time we meet, we actually have a actual set of lists of issues.
Yeah, since I opened that topic to get other people to do work, I'll take on the work as well. I'll start a discussion, and I'll create a discussion topic in GitHub, and we can post everything there. How does that sound?
Sounds good. Well, I'll make sure our team contributes to that as well.
I think that'd be a really interesting discussion. Thanks.
Yep.
Great. Yeah, I'm excited to see that happening. I know there's been plenty of good feedback already, so getting it in one place will be great.
It was a great idea, James. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Great. Well, have a good week, and we'll talk to you actually in 2 weeks. We're canceling next week's meeting, but talk to everyone on the 29th. Thanks, everyone.